My wife tried to poison me the night after I caught her with my brother, so I handed her a glass and didn't drink mine. The next evening, she saw the photos and collapsed on the floor. Before we begin, please subscribe, and I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from. 30 years of marriage, and I thought I had built something unshakable, until the silence in my own home began to feel heavier than the walls themselves. I used to believe that silence meant peace. I would come home after long hours balancing numbers at the firm, drop my keys on the entryway table, and listen to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the house we had bought together, the clock ticking on the wall. In those days, silence felt like safety, like the quiet acknowledgement of a shared life. But somewhere along the way, that silence changed. It became sharp, cutting, almost accusatory, as if the house itself had grown tired of carrying secrets I was too blind to see. I still remember the first time Ellen told me she wanted diamond earrings. We were standing in a department store, the kind of place where the lighting was so bright it made everything look more expensive than it really was. She held a pair up to her ears, her eyes sparkling, and she said softly, "If I had these, I'd feel like the luckiest woman alive." I didn't hesitate. I worked double shifts for weeks, my back aching from hours hunched over ledgers, my eyes burning from the fluorescent lights, just to make sure I could buy them. The day I placed them in her hands, the way she smiled and wrapped her arms around my neck, it felt like a victory, proof that sacrifice could be turned into love. But those days were long gone. Now Ellen rarely smiled, at least not at me. That Saturday, I found myself outside mowing the lawn. The sky was a crisp October blue, leaves scattered across the grass like discarded memories. The engine of the mower roared in my ears, but my mind wandered, as it always did, to the small dreams I had set aside. A trip to Italy we never took. A fishing boat I once sketched on the back of a receipt. A camera I never bought because there was always something more important for the family. Each time I pushed the mower forward, I felt the weight of those lost dreams pressing harder against my chest. When I finished, I wiped the sweat from my forehead and leaned against the porch rail, looking at the home I had spent 3 decades maintaining. The paint needed touching up, the gutters sagged, but it was still sturdy, still ours. Ellen was inside, I assumed, though I hadn't heard her voice all morning. I walked in, expecting the smell of coffee, or maybe something baking. Instead, the air was heavy with nothing at all. She was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a magazine. She barely looked up when I entered. "You missed a spot out back," she said flatly. I nodded, forcing a small smile. "I'll get it later." Her eyes flicked up then, sharp, assessing. "Frank, don't you ever think this life is small? Just mowing lawns and paying bills. Is this all you ever wanted?" Her words stung more than I let show. I set my keys down, the sound echoing louder than I expected. I wanted a home, a family. I thought that was enough. She shrugged, returning to her magazine. "Maybe for you." The words hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to argue, to remind her of the nights I stayed at the office so she could have the bigger house, the bay window she adored. But the fight drained out of me before it could start. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitter taste filling the silence she had left behind. That evening, Neil showed up. I heard his laugh before I even opened the door. My younger brother had always carried himself like the world owed him something. He was wearing a new jacket, leather with a sheen that screamed money he didn't earn. "Frank," he boomed, clapping me on the shoulder. "How's my big brother doing?" I forced a smile. "Holding steady." He walked past me without waiting for an invitation, heading straight for the kitchen. Ellen greeted him with more warmth than she had shown me all day, her eyes lighting up as she poured him a drink. I watched from the doorway, my jaw tightening. Neil had been a constant storm in my life. I had paid for his college when he flunked out the first time, covered his rent when he was between jobs, and bailed him out of shady deals that always seemed one step from disaster. And every time, he would flash that slick grin and promise, "Next time will be different." But it never was. "So," Neil said, settling into a chair like he owned the place, "I've got this new venture. Big money potential. I just need some backing to get it off the ground." I sighed. "Neil, we've been down this road before." He waved me off, laughing. "Come on, Frank. Don't be such an accountant about it. You've always been too cautious." "That's why you never lived big." Ellen laughed then, a sharp sound that cut through me. She reached over and touched his arm lightly, as if his recklessness was charming. I felt my stomach knot. "Living big doesn't mean wasting what you have," I said quietly. Neil leaned back, smirking. "Spoken like a man who never took a risk. Look at you, same house, same job. Don't you ever wonder what you missed?" Ellen didn't defend me. She just sipped her wine, her lips curving in a smile that wasn't for me. I excused myself, retreating to the living room. The television flickered silently, a football game playing to an empty audience. I sat in my chair, staring at the screen without seeing it. Their laughter drifted from the kitchen, blending with the sound of the ticking clock on the mantel. That night, when I finally climbed into bed, Ellen was already asleep, turned away from me. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing. But it wasn't soothing. It was distant, foreign, like she was already gone. I thought about the years I had spent sacrificing. Late nights at the office, weekends repairing the house, every dream shelved for the sake of family. I thought about how many times I had saved Neil, and how each time he came back needing more. And then I thought about Ellen's laughter earlier that night. Not the way she used to laugh with me, light and full of warmth. This was sharper, brighter, meant for someone else. I turned off the lamp, but the darkness didn't bring rest. The silence pressed in, heavier than ever, and I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, wondering why Ellen's laughter with my brother echoed louder than anything she'd said to me in years. The photograph trembled in my hand. Ellen's smile pressed against Neil's shoulder, her laughter frozen in a way I hadn't seen in years. I had been going through an old drawer in our bedroom, searching for a set of spare keys. I wasn't looking for anything incriminating, not consciously. But when I opened that envelope and saw the glossy print staring back at me, my breath stopped. I remembered our wedding day, how she had once leaned against me in the very same way, whispering that I was her hero, that I was the man who would carry her through every storm. That memory made the photo in my hand cut even deeper, a cruel echo of what we once were. The photo was candid, taken at some gathering I hadn't attended. Neil's grin was familiar, charming to everyone, but hollow to me. Ellen's face lit with a happiness that I hadn't seen directed my way in years. Her hand rested too naturally on his arm, too possessively, like it belonged there. My chest tightened, the room spinning for a moment. I pressed the photo flat against the dresser, staring at the truth that I could no longer ignore. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I moved through the motions, ate breakfast, read the newspaper, even fixed a loose board on the porch, but my thoughts circled back to that image. Was I overreacting? Was it possible it was just a careless moment, a snapshot captured at the wrong time? I tried to reason with myself, but the pit in my stomach grew heavier with every passing hour. By evening, I had made a decision. Ellen had mentioned she was going out with friends, dinner downtown. Something in me stirred, the urge to see for myself, to confirm what I feared. I told myself it was foolish, but I drove anyway, the rain streaking across my windshield, Portland's neon lights shimmering through the downpour. The restaurant wasn't anything extravagant, just a dimly lit place with booths tucked against the wall and a faint smell of garlic and herbs wafting into the air. I pushed through the door, brushing water from my jacket, and glanced around, expecting to spot Ellen with her friends. Instead, my eyes locked on a booth across the room. There she was, Ellen, not with her friends, with Neil. Her hand was on his arm, her body leaning close, her laugh sharp and bright, slicing through the murmur of the room. Neil tilted his head toward her, saying something that made her eyes spark with that same light I'd once believed was reserved for me. I froze. My fingers gripped the stem of a wine glass on the bar counter as I steadied myself, ordering something I didn't even taste. The glass trembled in my hand, a drop spilling onto the white cloth, spreading like blood. I had come here to surprise her, maybe to salvage a night after another long day at the office. Instead, I was the one blindsided. Every detail cut into me. The way she leaned toward him, the way her laughter rang through the space, the way Neil's watch glinted under the sconce light, a flashy thing I could never afford. My brother, my wife, together. I tried to breathe evenly, tried to convince myself it was innocent, but when her eyes met mine across the room, the smile slipped from her face. I saw it clearly, the delight draining, replaced by something colder, harder, a mask snapping into place. She slid out of the booth, smoothing her dress as if nothing were wrong. "Frank," she said with a light tone, but her eyes betrayed her. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I answered, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. "Oh, it's just Neil," she explained quickly. Catching up. The words felt like a slap. I glanced at Neil, who leaned back casually, adjusting his expensive watch with that smug smile he wore like armor. "Good to see you, Frank," he said smoothly. "Been a while." I nodded, my throat tight. The restaurant air suddenly felt stifling, the scent of garlic mixed with betrayal pressing in around me. I set my glass down, its red stain a silent accusation, and pushed back my chair. "I'll let you get back to it," I said. "Frank, wait," Ellen began, but I was already walking away, my footsteps loud against the hardwood, each one pulling me further from the life I thought I knew. The rain hit my face like needles as I stepped outside, the night air cold and merciless. My thin jacket offered little protection, but I hardly noticed. I stood there for a moment, under the flickering neon glow, my hands trembling at my sides. My watch caught my eye, stopped, the hands frozen at 7:43. Time itself seemed to mock me, as if it wanted to keep me locked in this moment of betrayal forever. I climbed into the car, the engine humming softly, but I didn't move. The rain beat against the windshield, each drop a question hammering into me. How long had this been happening? Was this the first time, or had I been blind for years? I thought about every sacrifice I had made, every late night, every dollar given, every dream set aside for Ellen, for us. I thought about Neil, the brother I had pulled out of failure time and again, who now sat laughing with my wife, as if my life was nothing but a discarded joke. I reached over to the passenger seat, my hand brushing against an old envelope Ellen had once given me. Inside, years ago, she had tucked a love note, perfumed with her handwriting declaring that I was her hero. I pulled it out, staring at the words that had once been my anchor. Now it felt like a relic from a world that no longer existed. My knuckles whitened as I crumpled it, the faint perfume still clinging to my fingers like a ghost of a life already gone. I drove home in silence, the wipers struggling against the relentless rain. The house greeted me with the same stillness it always had, but now it felt colder, emptier. I sat in the living room with the lights off, staring at the photo album I had pulled from the shelf. Its pages were heavy with memories I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. I flipped through the images. Our first home, a cramped bungalow we painted together. Ellen wearing my old flannel shirt, her cheeks speckled with paint. Our wedding day, her veil catching in the breeze. Every picture told a story of love I had believed in with all my heart. Now, looking at them, all I saw were shadows, questions I couldn't answer. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second louder than the last. I rubbed my temples, my head pounding. Ellen came home late. The sound of her heels clicking against the floorboards. She moved quickly past me, offering a thin smile and no explanation. I didn't ask. I couldn't. The words would have shattered me, and I wasn't ready yet. Instead, I sat in the darkness, my coffee gone cold, the photo album open on my lap, staring at the life that mocked me. As the rain hammered the roof, I realized something I had avoided for too long. Doubt was no longer enough. I needed answers. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, the stopped watch still on my wrist, and placed the crumpled love note into the trash. My reflection stared back at me in the mirror. Tired eyes, gray hair at my temples, a man who had given everything and been left with nothing but silence. I told myself that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow I would start seeking the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I walked out into the pouring rain, her words echoing in my head. It's just Neil. As if 30 years of my life could be reduced to nothing at all. Time seemed to stop the night I saw them together. My watch frozen at 7:43, as if mocking me, daring me to stay trapped in that moment. Sleep hadn't come easily since then. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ellen's hand resting on Neil's arm, her laugh slicing through the air, sharp and cruel. I saw Neil's smug smile, his expensive watch gleaming under that restaurant sconce, as if to remind me that I could never compete with his reckless charm. I told myself it might have been innocent, but my heart knew better. The truth gnawed at me, demanding to be faced. I thought about the sketch of the boat I once kept folded in my desk drawer. A dream I never pursued because Ellen had dismissed it with a laugh, saying it was too small of a dream for her. At the time, I told myself it was fine. I was practical, dependable. Boats were luxuries, not necessities. But now that sketch came back to me, a reminder of all I had set aside. I had built my life around sacrifice, around stability, around doing what was right. And in return, my wife and my brother had made me the fool. I couldn't just sit in that living room with old photo albums mocking me. I needed proof. My mind kept circling back to a name I hadn't spoken in years, Joe Callahan. I had met Joe during a fraud case at the firm. Back then, I was just the accountant providing clean numbers, while Joe had been the blunt instrument who got the truth out of liars. He was gruff, rough around the edges, and never far from a cigarette. But he was sharp, sharper than most men I'd ever met. If anyone could uncover what Ellen and Neil were hiding, it was him. The next morning, rain pattered against the window of my cramped office in downtown Portland. The streets outside shimmered with puddles, neon signs blinking through the drizzle. My desk was cluttered with ledgers, invoices, tax forms, the usual debris of a life spent balancing other people's numbers. Normally, I found comfort in the order of it all, in the clean lines of numbers adding up. But not that day. The numbers meant nothing. My mind was chaos. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through contacts until I found his name. Joe Callahan. My thumb hovered over it for what felt like an eternity. Dialing meant admitting I didn't trust my wife. Dialing meant admitting my brother was capable of something unforgivable. But staying in the dark was worse. I pressed the button. The line crackled. Then came his voice, gravelly and unmistakable. Callahan. It's Frank Russell, I said, my voice steadier than my pulse. There was a pause, the faint creak of a chair. Frank, been a while, what's up? I need your help, I said. The words were heavy, like stones in my throat. Who's the target? He asked, casual, as if this were just another Tuesday. My wife, I said, forcing the name out. Ellen. And my brother Neil. A low whistle carried through the receiver. Well, hell, that's not what I expected to hear. Can we meet? Diner on 5th, 1 hour. Bring whatever you've got. I hung up, my hand shaking as I set the phone down. From my wallet, I pulled out a picture of Ellen from years ago. She was smiling, sunlight caught in her hair, warmth in her eyes. I stared at it for a long moment, then slid it into an envelope. The same envelope I had once kept in my car, the one that had held her love note. Now it would hold something darker. The diner smelled of coffee and grease, its windows fogged from the rain outside. Joe was already there, sitting in a corner booth with his coat damp and a cigarette stubbed out in the ashtray beside him. He looked older than when I last saw him, lines etched deeper into his face, but his eyes were the same, sharp, unrelenting. He gave me a nod as I slid into the booth. Spill it, Frank. What's she done? I pushed the envelope across the table. I saw her with my brother. Too close. I need to know what's going on. Joe opened the envelope, glancing at the photo inside. He grunted. This her? I nodded. Won't be cheap, he said, tucking it away. But I'll find what's there. Anything else I should know? They're clever, I said quietly. Neil's always been slippery. And Ellen, she's not who she used to be. Joe scribbled a note on a pad, his pen scratching against the paper. Give me a week. I leaned forward. I need more than just pictures, Joe. I need the truth. Everything. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing. Stay calm. Don't tip them off. Let me do the digging. He stood, tossing a few bills onto the table for his coffee, and shrugged his coat back on. I'll be in touch. I sat there long after he left, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to me, the rain outside blurring the city into streaks of gray. When I finally stepped back out, the cold air hit me hard, soaking through my jacket. My watch was still frozen at 7:43, a cruel reminder of the night that had changed everything. Back at my office, I locked the envelope with Ellen's photo in my desk drawer. Its presence was a quiet promise. The rain hammered against the glass, mirroring the storm in my chest. What would Joe find? A fling? Something worse? The truth felt like a blade pressing against my skin, sharp and close. That evening, I drove home slowly, the windshield wipers beating a rhythm against my thoughts. Ellen was already there, humming softly in the kitchen as if nothing were wrong. She looked up when I walked in, her smile practiced, her eyes cool. How was work? She asked. Busy, I replied, hanging my coat. She nodded, turning back to stir a pot on the stove. Dinner will be ready soon. I watched her for a moment, the way she moved, the ease of her deception. She had no idea that I was done being blind. She had no idea that the man she thought she had fooled was now watching her every move. I excused myself and went upstairs, loosening my tie as I sat at my desk. I pulled out a notepad and began to write, my pen scratching deliberately across the page. Dates, times, details, the photograph from the drawer, the restaurant, Ellen's dismissive words. Every detail was catalogued like a ledger I was balancing. Only this time, the account wasn't numbers. It was betrayal. The hours passed, the house growing quiet as Ellen went to bed. I stayed awake, staring at the page until the ink blurred in my tired eyes. I told myself that this was only the beginning, that I would not rest until every truth was unearthed. I slid the notepad into the drawer with the envelope, locking it with a small key. My hand lingered there, steady, even as my heart raced. For 30 years, I had lived as the dependable husband, the steady provider, the forgiving brother. But now, for the first time in my life, I was becoming something else. I slid the envelope across the table, my hand steady though my pulse thundered, knowing this was the first step toward unraveling 30 years of lies. The folder slid across Joe's desk, its thin weight heavier than any burden I had ever carried. I remembered the last time I had shoved money into Neil's hands, his face full of hollow gratitude and promises he would never keep. Ellen had whispered later that night that I was too soft, too trusting, that Neil would never change. And still I had gone back again and again, bailing him out, believing blood was enough to excuse betrayal. Sitting here now, I realized I had been paying the price for that softness my entire life. Joe Callahan's office smelled like stale coffee and old cigarettes. The blinds rattled against the window frame as rain pelted down outside, turning the streets of Portland into mirrors of gray. A single bulb dangled above his desk, casting shadows that seemed to cling to the piles of folders stacked in teetering columns. Joe leaned back in his chair, the springs groaning, his face half hidden in smoke. "Here's what I got so far," he said, sliding the folder closer with two nicotine-stained fingers. I reached for it, my hand steady, though my gut churned. I opened the folder, the paper edges rasping under my fingertips. Photographs, notes typed in a neat, impersonal font, timestamps, locations, Ellen's name, Neil's name. Each line pressed harder into me than the last. "They met 3 times this week," Joe said, his voice low but sharp. "Twice at a cafe near Neil's apartment, once at the Portland Grand Hotel downtown." I stared at the photos. Ellen sitting across from Neil in a booth, her hand grazing his arm, her head tilted toward him, laughing, her eyes alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. Neil smirking, leaning too close. Another photo showed them outside the hotel, Ellen's hand clutching Neil's jacket as they slipped inside. My jaw clenched until I thought my teeth might crack. 30 years of marriage reduced to grainy photographs, every sacrifice mocked by the light in her eyes as she looked at him. Joe lit another cigarette, the smoke curling upward. "They're careful," he said, "but not careful enough. They don't think anyone's watching. That makes them sloppy." I flipped to the back of the folder and froze. Bank receipts, transfers, notes scribbled in Joe's handwriting. "What's this?" I asked. "Neil's got dealings that don't add up," Joe said, exhaling smoke. "Money moving through accounts that shouldn't exist. I can't pin it yet, but it smells bad. Real bad. Might be bigger than an affair." My stomach turned. Bigger than an affair. Ellen wasn't just betraying me with another man. She was tethering herself to something darker, something that could scorch us all. I closed the folder slowly, pressing my palm flat against it as if I could hold the storm inside. "This is it," I said, my voice low but trembling with rage. Joe shrugged. "It's a start. I can dig deeper, but you got to understand. This kind of dirt? It's dynamite. Once it blows, no one walks away clean." I nodded, though my throat was tight. "Dig. I need everything, no matter how ugly." He scribbled a note on his pad, then stubbed out his cigarette. "All right. But Frank, stay calm. Don't confront them yet. They don't know you're onto them. Keep it that way." I gathered the folder, tucking it back into the envelope I'd carried like a curse since the night of the restaurant. I left his office, the creak of the stairs echoing behind me, and stepped into the rain. The cold water soaked through my coat in seconds, but I barely felt it. Back home, the house was dark. Ellen wasn't there. I set the envelope on the kitchen table, staring at it under the dim light. The photos stared back, Ellen's smile slicing into me, Neil's smirk taunting me. I spread them out, each one a wound. I wanted to tear them apart, burn them, but instead I gathered them neatly again. They weren't just pain. They were proof. The clock ticked on the wall, steady, indifferent. I sat there for hours, the rain easing outside, leaving only drips against the window. My coffee went cold beside me, untouched. I thought about Ellen's words, her sharp tone when she called our life small. I thought about Neil's arrogance, laughing at me for never living big. I thought about every dream I had shelved so they could take everything they wanted. But now, I wasn't soft anymore. I wasn't trusting. I was watching. When Ellen finally came home, her heels clicking against the hardwood, I didn't move. She glanced at me, surprised to see me still awake, and smiled faintly. "You're up late," she said. "Yeah," I answered, keeping my voice even. She leaned down, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Long day. I'm exhausted." I nodded, studying her carefully. Her perfume lingered in the air as she disappeared upstairs. She had no idea that her lies were already unraveling. I sat back, my eyes on the envelope. Proof in the shadows. Proof that would cut deeper than anything she could ever say. I spread the photographs on my kitchen table, each one a wound and a weapon, and realized I couldn't confront them yet. Not until I had everything. The candlelight shimmered across Ellen's burgundy dress as she leaned over my glass, her hand moving with a precision that made my blood run cold. I thought back to all the nights I had given up dinners to finish overtime work at the firm. The sacrifices Ellen once praised, the thank you hugs that made me feel like I was building something lasting. Over time, those moments had turned brittle, her appreciation shrinking to complaints, her eyes searching for something beyond what I could give. And now here we were, at the dining room table, celebrating 30 years of marriage in a house filled with shadows. The dining room was dressed for the occasion. Ellen had laid out the fine china we hadn't touched in years, polished silverware gleaming under the glow of tall white candles. She'd prepared roast beef, garlic potatoes, a side of asparagus, meals she hadn't cooked for me in a long time. To anyone else, it might have looked like romance, like a wife honoring decades with her husband. But I knew better. I could feel the falseness in every detail. She moved gracefully, smiling with practiced warmth as she poured wine into the crystal goblets we had received as a wedding gift. Her burgundy dress clung to her figure, elegant and deliberate, like armor she wore for this night. She glanced at the clock on the mantel, the second hand ticking steadily, before sitting across from me. 30 years, Frank, she said, raising her glass. That's something to celebrate. I lifted mine, but I didn't drink. 30 years, I echoed, my voice low. She smiled, but there was tension behind it. I watched her carefully, every flicker of her eyes, every twitch of her fingers. I wasn't looking at a wife anymore. I was studying an opponent. Dinner began with small talk. Ellen asked about my day, about the firm, her tone light but distracted. She laughed too loudly at her own remarks, her eyes darting toward the kitchen as if waiting for something. I responded sparingly, my mind not on the food, but on the folder hidden in my office, the photos of her and Neil slipping into a hotel, the receipts Joe had handed me. I thought of Joe's warning. You're holding dynamite. And still, here she was, smiling across the table, pretending to be the devoted wife. I noticed her hand trembling as she adjusted her napkin. Then, in one subtle motion, she reached into her lap. When her fingers reappeared, they hovered over my glass. A faint dust drifted into the red wine, so light it would have been invisible if I hadn't been staring. My stomach twisted. Poison? A sedative? I didn't know, but I knew betrayal when I saw it. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face calm. I lifted the glass, let it hover near my lips, then set it back down. Not thirsty tonight, I said casually, sliding it aside. Her eyes widened just for a moment. Then she smiled, too quickly. Suit yourself. I cut into the roast beef, chewing slowly while my thoughts raced. She thought me blind, thought I was still the same man who worked overtime and ignored the silences. But I wasn't blind anymore. I had seen the photos, heard the lies in her voice, and now I had witnessed her hand trying to erase me from the table altogether. Dessert, she announced suddenly, standing too quickly. Her chair scraped against the floor, her heels clicking toward the kitchen. I watched her go, my hands folded neatly in front of me. The clatter of plates came from the other room, followed by the faint scrape of a knife. She returned with a tray, a cake sliced into neat wedges. She placed one before me, her hand shaking as she set the plate down. "Looks wonderful," I said evenly. Her eyes darted to the untouched wine glass. "It's chocolate, your favorite." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "Thank you." She sat down, her hands folded tightly, her knuckles pale. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows across her face, revealing the cracks in her mask. We ate in silence. Each bite felt heavy, each glance at her reminding me of the powder I had seen fall into my drink. She asked me a few questions about work, her voice too bright, too eager. I answered in clipped words, watching her unravel. At one point she tried again, lifting her own glass. "To us," she said. I met her gaze. "To us," I repeated, but I didn't lift mine. Her hand trembled as she set her glass back down. I could see the frustration rising in her eyes. The desperation. She was slipping, and she knew it. As she cleared the plates, I stood, brushing past her towards the hallway. The clock on the mantel struck 10, its chime reverberating through the house. I paused, looking back at her silhouette framed by candlelight. For a moment, I thought about the early years, about the girl in the paint-stained flannel shirt laughing as we painted our first house together. That girl was gone, replaced by the woman clutching a tray with shaking hands. I turned away, the sound of the chime still echoing in my ears. Her hand shook as she sliced the cake, and I realized she wasn't just betraying me. She was plotting to erase me. I dialed Sarah's number with a hand steadier than my pulse, knowing her world was about to collapse, just like mine had. I thought about the time she once thanked me for covering Neil's rent, her eyes brimming with relief as she whispered that I had saved their marriage. I had nodded back then, believing I was doing the right thing. That family meant helping, even when it hurt. But now I realized I had only been delaying the inevitable, feeding a man who devoured everything in his path. And Sarah, poor Sarah, had been as blind as I was. The rain tapped against my office window in a slow rhythm as the phone rang. I stood in that cramped space, the smell of paper and ink thick in the air, the folder of photographs from Joe locked in my desk drawer like a secret too heavy to touch. My heart thudded, each beat louder than the ticking of the clock on the wall. "Hello?" Sarah's voice was tentative, cautious. "It's Frank," I said quietly. There was a pause. Then a sharp intake of breath. "Frank, is everything okay?" I closed my eyes for a moment, gripping the phone tighter. "No, and I think you already know something's wrong." Her silence told me she did. "I need you to come to dinner tomorrow night," I continued, "at my house, 7 o'clock. "Dinner." Her tone was uncertain, almost frightened. "What's going on?" I swallowed hard. "I can't explain everything now, but you need to see it for yourself. Please, Sarah, trust me." Another long pause, then she exhaled. "If this is about Neil—" "It is," I said firmly. "And Ellen." The silence stretched again, heavy and jagged. Finally, she whispered, "I'll be there." I lowered the phone, setting it gently on the desk. My fingers drummed against the wood, steady, deliberate. The decision was made. The circle of betrayal would be confronted. Not just between husband and wife, but before the people who needed to know the truth most. That evening, Ellen moved around the kitchen with a forced cheerfulness, humming a tune that grated against me. She laid out plates, polished glasses, her smile brittle when she glanced my way. "I thought we'd invite Neil tomorrow," she said casually, as though it were a harmless suggestion. I forced a nod. "Good idea." She blinked, surprised by my agreement, then smiled. "And Sarah, of course. It's been a while since we've all sat down together." Her voice was honeyed, but her eyes betrayed the calculation behind the suggestion. She had no idea I had already spoken to Sarah, that Sarah was coming not as a guest, but as an ally. Later, as Ellen slept upstairs, I sat at my desk in the dim light, the folder open before me. The photographs stared back, Ellen leaning into Neil, her smile sharp, his arm wrapped around her waist. My pen scratched across a notepad as I made meticulous notes, dates and times lined up like an accountant, balancing the cruelest ledger of all. I thought of my father, who taught me that numbers never lie. That truth can always be found in what adds up, and here in black and white was the sum of 30 years of sacrifice, betrayal, lies, greed. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the glass. I leaned back, my hands clasped, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the end. The next morning, I drove across town to Sarah's house. The neighborhood was quiet, tidy lawns and trimmed hedges lining the street. Her porch light was on, even though the sun had risen, a small beacon against the gray sky. She opened the door quickly, her face pale, her eyes rimmed red. "Frank," she said softly. I stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of lavender and coffee. A photo of her and Neil on their wedding day hung crooked on the wall, his grin smug even then. She gestured for me to sit, her hands trembling as she poured coffee into chipped mugs. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice quivering. I set the mug aside, leaning forward. "I've seen them, Sarah. Ellen and Neil. Together. More than once." Her lips parted, a faint sound escaping her throat. She set her mug down too quickly, coffee sloshing over the rim. "No," she whispered. "No, he wouldn't." I reached into my coat and pulled out a single photo, sliding it across the table. Ellen's hand on Neil's arm, her head tilted, both of them laughing. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. A sob broke free, her shoulders trembling. "How long?" "A while," I said. "Long enough for me to stop doubting and start planning." She wiped her eyes, anger flaring through her grief. "He lied to me. All those nights he said he was working late." I nodded. The same nights Ellen told me she was with her friends. Her eyes locked on mine, fury simmering beneath her tears. "What do we do?" "Tomorrow night," I said. "You'll see everything. I'll lay it all out. No more lies." She nodded slowly, her breath shaky. "I'll be there." I stood, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You deserve the truth, Sarah. We both do." Driving home, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The pieces were aligning, the stage being set. Ellen thought she was orchestrating a dinner to maintain appearances. Neil thought he was untouchable. But they had underestimated me. That evening, as Ellen busied herself with preparations, I sat quietly in the living room, watching her. She arranged flowers, polished silver, her movements precise, almost frantic. She looked up once, catching me staring, and smiled. "You'll see, Frank," she said softly. "Tomorrow will be perfect." I nodded, hiding the storm beneath my calm expression. "Yes," I said. "Perfect." When she went upstairs, I returned to my office, unlocking the drawer and pulling out the folder. I tucked the photographs and Joe's notes into a larger envelope, sealing it carefully. The paper felt heavy in my hands, a weapon disguised as proof. I slid it into my jacket pocket, its presence grounding me. I stood by the window, staring out at the drizzle falling under the streetlight, my reflection faint in the glass. For 30 years, I had been predictable, reliable, the man who always chose sacrifice, who always forgave. Ellen and Neil thought they knew me. They thought I was still that man. But tomorrow night, they would see the truth. I slid the envelope into my jacket pocket, its weight a silent vow that tomorrow would end 30 years of deception. The dining room glowed with candles, the table gleaming with silverware, but beneath the polish was a battlefield waiting to erupt. I thought of every football game I watched alone, while Ellen laughed somewhere else. Every Saturday morning I spent mowing the lawn while Neil boasted of his easy life. Those small sacrifices that seemed invisible at the time now burned like scars, each one a reminder that I had been carrying a family that only mocked the weight I bore. And tonight, I would finally stop carrying it. Tonight, I would make them feel what I had felt. The table stretched long beneath the chandelier, set with crisp linens and gleaming glasses that reflected the candlelight. The smell of roasted herbs filled the air, mingling with the faint tang of rain seeping in from the windows. I moved through the room, slowly, adjusting a plate here, pouring wine there, each movement deliberate. My jacket felt heavier than usual, the envelope tucked inside a steady weight against my ribs. I could feel it with every breath. The first knock came just after 7. Ellen swept into the room from the hallway, her heels clicking like a metronome against the hardwood. She wore a deep green dress tonight, her smile brittle, rehearsed. She opened the door with an eager warmth that I hadn't seen directed toward me in years. Neil stepped in, booming laughter filling the house as if he owned it. "Frank, you old dog," he said, clapping my shoulder hard enough to sting. "Pulling out all the stops, huh?" His eyes swept the room, lingering on Ellen a beat too long. She smoothed her dress, her cheeks flushing faintly, and I felt my stomach tighten with controlled fury. "Welcome," I said evenly, pouring him a glass of wine. He grinned, taking it without hesitation. "To family," he said, raising the glass in a mock toast. Before I could answer, another knock sounded. Sarah stepped inside, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She clutched her purse to her chest like a shield, her eyes flickering between Neil and Ellen before landing on me. I saw the fear there, but also the determination. "Sarah," I said, guiding her to a seat. "I'm glad you came." She gave me the faintest nod, her voice almost a whisper. "Of course." We sat down, the 4 of us arranged around the table like actors in a play no one wanted to perform. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, its sound loud in the silence that stretched between bites of roasted beef and forced laughter. Ellen took her role as hostess seriously, smiling too widely, filling the air with empty chatter. "Frank always did know how to bring us together," she said, reaching for my hand across the table. I pulled back smoothly, pretending to pour more wine. Her smile faltered for a second before she recovered. Neil cracked jokes, his voice loud, his grin wider than ever, but his eyes betrayed him, darting toward Ellen, lingering too long. Each glance was another spark against the powder keg waiting to ignite. Sarah barely touched her food. She sat rigid, her fork scraping against her plate, her gaze shifting between Neil and Ellen with every awkward moment. I could almost hear her heart pounding. "To family," Neil said again, lifting his glass high. "And to Frank, for hosting us." "Family," I echoed, my voice even, my eyes locked on Ellen's. She froze, her glass halfway to her lips. Then she forced a smile, her knuckles white as she set the glass back down. Sarah's hand tightened on her napkin, twisting it until her knuckles turned pale. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for something, for the truth I had promised her. Dinner stretched on. Every word waited, every laugh strained. I spoke little, watching, waiting, letting the tension coil tighter with every passing second. The smell of garlic and roasted meat hung heavy in the room, mingling with Ellen's perfume, cloying and suffocating. I rose once to clear a plate, brushing past Ellen in the narrow space. Her perfume enveloped me, but beneath it I caught the faint scent of nerves, the way her hand trembled as she set down her fork. She was unraveling, and I hadn't even touched the envelope yet. When I returned to the table, I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket. My fingers brushed the edge of the envelope, its weight grounding me. I set it down carefully on the table, its plain surface stark against the white linen. All three of them looked at it instantly. Ellen's smile wavered. Neil's grin tightened into something harder. Sarah's breath caught, but I didn't open it. Not yet. "Dessert soon," I said calmly, my gaze sweeping over them. The clock on the mantel struck 11. Its chime cutting through the silence like a blade. Ellen's smile faltered. Neil's jaw tightened. Sarah's hands trembled in her lap. I leaned back in my chair, the envelope untouched before me, my mind on the moment I chose to strike. The clock struck 11, its chime cutting through the tension, and I knew it was time to let the truth bleed into the open. The photographs spilled across the table like shards of glass, each one slicing through 30 years of lies. I remembered the envelope Ellen once filled with love notes, her handwriting delicate, her perfume clinging to the paper. That envelope had once been a vessel of devotion. Now it carried proof of betrayal, a ledger of every moment she and Neil thought they could hide from me. Tonight, that proof would become their undoing. The dining room was heavy with silence, the air thick with the scent of roasted herbs and red wine gone sour. Candlelight flickered against the photographs as they scattered across the table, each image a wound. Ellen and Neil in a cafe, her hand resting on his. The two of them slipping into a hotel, their faces too close. Neil's arm draped around her waist as if she had belonged to him all along. Ellen froze, her glass trembling, wine spilling over the rim onto the linen cloth. Neil's hand shot out, snatching one of the photos, his jaw tight, the mask of charm cracking under the weight of exposure. Sarah's gasp cut through the air, her hand flying to her mouth as a sob broke free. "What is this, Frank?" Ellen demanded, her voice sharp, but it cracked on the edges. Her eyes darted to Neil, wide with panic. "You're spying on me," she hissed, her words frantic, desperate. I leaned forward, my voice low, steady, cutting. "I didn't need to. You weren't exactly discreet." Neil fumbled, his face flushed. "Frank, come on. It's not what it looks like." Sarah's voice erupted, raw and furious. "Not what it looks like." Her eyes blazed as she turned on him. "You lied to me. You lied to us." She shoved her chair back, the sound splitting through the room. Tears streaked her face, her hands trembling as she pointed at the photographs. "How long, Neil? How long have you been humiliating me like this?" Neil reached for her, stammering, but she recoiled, fury breaking through her grief. Ellen's lips curled, a last grasp at control. "This doesn't concern you, Frank. You shouldn't care." Her words were a slap, but I didn't flinch. I had replayed that dismissal too many times in my mind, her shrug when I confronted her, her casual cruelty. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope, the same one that had once held her promises. Its weight felt final now, a guillotine waiting to fall. I set it before her deliberately, my eyes never leaving hers. "Open it," I said, my voice steady, cold. Her fingers hovered, trembling, her breath shallow. The clock on the mantel struck midnight, its chime reverberating through the room like a funeral bell. Rain pounded the windows, drowning the silence that had taken hold. Ellen tore the envelope open, the paper ripping like flesh. A single document slid free, fluttering onto the table. She scanned it, her breath hitching. Then came the scream, a raw, piercing sound that cut through the storm outside. Her face twisted, eyes wide with horror. She turned on Neil, her voice a snarl. "You knew. You knew and you didn't tell me." She shoved him hard, nails raking his arm. Neil flinched, hands raised, stammering. "Ellen, I didn't. It's not like that." Sarah stood, her chair toppling behind her, her voice shaking with rage. "You monster!" she spat at Neil. Then she turned to me, her eyes filled with anguish. "Frank, Why didn't you warn me sooner? Her words cut deep, but I held her gaze, unyielding. I warned you tonight. You're free now, Sarah. We both are. Ellen sank to her knees, clutching the medical report, sobbing, her voice ragged. Frank, please, she begged. We can fix this. I didn't mean— You meant every choice, I interrupted, my tone cold as steel. Every lie. Every betrayal. You and Neil chose this. Neil's head dropped, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Frank, he mumbled, his voice desperate. I'm your brother. We're family. Family doesn't do this, I said, turning away. The photographs crunched under my shoe as I stepped past them, the sound a fitting end to their charade. Sarah followed me, her footsteps echoing in the hall. Behind us, Ellen's sobs filled the house, while Neil sat in broken silence. Outside, the rain poured down, soaking my coat, cold and cleansing. The stopped clock remained in my mind, frozen at the moment I had chosen to take back my life. Ellen's scream echoed in my ears, but it was no longer my burden. I was done carrying their lies. Months passed. The ocean stretched before my new apartment on the Oregon coast, its waves a steady pulse under a sky free of Portland's endless rain. I stood in my living room, boxes half unpacked, the scent of salt air mingling with fresh paint. 6 months had passed since that night, since the scream, since the collapse of the life I had built for others. The divorce papers had been signed in a lawyer's office, my hand steadier than I expected. Each signature was a line drawn between who I had been and who I was becoming. From one of the boxes, I pulled out the old mantel clock, the same one that had stopped during the confrontation. I wound it slowly, the tick filling the room, a sound of renewal. The apartment was smaller than the house I had built for Ellen, but every corner was mine, free of her shadow, free of Neil's leeching weight. I placed the clock on a shelf, its hands moving forward again, steady, like me. The past lingered only in fragments now. The photograph of Ellen and Neil no longer haunted me. I had burned it along with the envelope weeks ago, its ashes scattered in a fire pit, rising into the night sky like the last remnants of a life I no longer carried. I stepped out onto the balcony, the ocean air cool against my face. The waves crashed steadily, a song of possibility. On the small table sat a notebook filled with plans, a trip to Florence, a photography course I had postponed for decades, sketches of the boat I once dreamed of building, dreams delayed but not destroyed. I traced my fingers over a postcard from Florence, pinned to the wall inside, the colors bright, the promise real. Justice wasn't loud, I realized. It wasn't always about shouting or vengeance. Sometimes it was the quietest things, the tick of a clock, the steady rhythm of waves, the first breath of freedom after years of betrayal. I leaned on the railing, shoulders relaxed, my gaze on the horizon where the ocean met the sky. The future stretched before me, vast and open, waiting to be charted on my own terms. 6 months later, I wound the old stopped clock in my new apartment by the sea, its ticking steady again, like my life, moving forward at last.